Hello everybody, it's Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and I have another tutorial for you today. This time we're going to be tackling peeling away paper in layers. Specifically, maybe like wallpaper peeling off of like a haunted mansion, or a poster getting revealed or torn away. And just in general, I think it's a cool look in motion graphics in general. We'll begin simple and then add additional layers and solve different problems, but overall I think there's a lot of good ideas in here, and I think it's applicable to a lot of different things. First, let's take a look at a Google image search of poster size, and here's just some nice poster sizes. We're going to aim for a real world scale of 24 by 36 inches. So I've got a scene file already prepped. Here is a material brought in from Texture Haven, just so we have a little bit of a background, and we can begin with a poster. Starting out with a plane, I will say, let's make it line up with us. So let's say Z plus, and it's facing directly where we are. I want no subdivisions, so 0, 0, and a height of 36 inches. Type in inch there, and a width of, it will be 24 inches. And that is our overall poster size, which is great. We can zoom in on that. But the first step is, how many stripes do we want? How many strips of paper are going to peel away? To keep this nice and clean for myself, I'm going to make it 20 strips of paper will peel away. So let's just grab the width and divide it by 20. Divided by 20, hit enter, Cinema does the math for us, and there is our strip of paper. We're going to be using this number a bunch, the current width, so I'll select that, copy it, so it's on my clipboard. The first step I want is this to pivot from the bottom corner. We could make it editable, but let's keep it clean by just creating a null, putting the paper, let's even call this paper, into the null, and it should move over. Let's see, we want to move over on X, and we want that to be half of the copied amount. So hitting paste, divided by 2, that should scoot it over the exact amount we need. Copy the height, and let's put that into the Y height, divided by 2, and that should move it up in the air. So now our null is perfectly in the corner, and the paper strip is right here. Put this into a cloner, the cloner mode set to linear, and we want this pushing along X positive, so get rid of Y, add Z. Specifically, I need the width, so selecting that, copy, go to the cloner, and I'd like the X to be exactly that amount, and you can now see, hitting NB, you can see that there's a stripe, a stripe, a stripe. And how many do we want? Well, we divided it by 20, so we want 20. So we've recreated the poster from these individual strips of paper. So now that this is nice and clean, give that a quick save. Now that we've got the exact layout that we want, we need some subdivisions here. Selecting the paper, I would like a nice clean 100 height segments. So we get all these stripes, gives us plenty of geometry to work with to deform it. Now that we've got our layout, I don't need the cloner. I'll turn that off for a little bit. And how are we going to peel this away from the wall? Well, let's do it in the most straightforward way possible, and that is using a bend deformer. Now, a bend deformer, it can be really straightforward. We can make it a child because of the way we're bending it. It's very easy to just hit fit the parent, and it is now correctly stretched along these lines. I'd like it to be 1/10 of the height, just arbitrarily. So take the height divided by 10. Now it is a lot smaller right there. Increasing my strength, we can bend it on one side or the other. I would like it to go forward, so just bending the strength up a little bit. I'll spin this around. It looks like we need this to be at -90 for our direction, which should bend it off the wall moving forward. That is good. Now, what I'd actually like this to do is bend around a whole bunch of times. So not only do we get it spinning around, which we could do if we increase this, I would like it to fall off. So how would we do this? Let's pull this back, not quite so much. And I want it to apply everywhere. I would like this bend to apply pretty much everywhere all the time, full power. So setting the mode to unlimited, you see the entire thing is going to get this bend applied. I don't actually want it to go everywhere. Let's bend this a little bit tighter. I don't want this bend to be applied everywhere. So we will apply a fall off. Selecting fall off and then linear field. It will create a linear field and you'll get a really interesting look. And it's kind of interesting to note that there's a lot of crazy things you can do by combining even just a bend deformer with field fall offs. In this case though, I would like it set to, I think, Y plus, and it's going to be really big right now. I think taking the same height as the bend, copying this 9.144, pasting that in for the exact height, we now get this linear field with a decent amount of depth. You see it's all the way up here, all the way down to there. So having done that, we now have the entire top part of the paper bending around and again and again and again on top of itself, but nothing below it. Meaning, if I grab this linear field, we can clean this up a little bit. If I grab this linear field and start pulling it up and down, I can move this to such a position that we should be able to get this nice curl happening and it falls off. So let's pull that down. Now, I'm going to pull this down until this round part looks correct, and then we get this lump. The reason I'm using this larger linear field, it's larger than we need it to be, is because we'll use this same linear field several times later on. So this is just it's saving us time later on, is the point. Now, I don't want this bump to be there. We can get rid of it really easily by going into the bend fall off, into the fall off, creating a curve. And we are now using this curve to remap the input from that linear field. So if I start eating away at the bottom of the linear field, you can see I can start getting that bump to just erase itself out. And I want to move this as little as I can get away with. So right until everything's nice and smooth. If I go too far, it's going to start erasing out the rest of it. But if I move it over just enough, it begins at the same place where the curve begins. So that is pretty neat. And where it starts getting really interesting is if we grab this bend deformer and I start to move it up and down, you'll see that this setup allows me to eat away at the entire strip of paper. That just eats away the entire thing as we pass this bend deformer through it. That gets even better when we can get a curl on top of it. So pulling this down even further, let's hit R for rotate, and I believe just take this bend deformer and tilt it backwards. As I tilt it backwards, you'll see this spiral around. So now selecting the bend and moving it up and down, and I'm going to be sure to turn on these world coordinates, which means that little bit of rotation I put in is going to be countered. Otherwise we scoot away from it and into the wall. We don't want that. Hitting E for move, if I move this up, you can now see that as it travels through the strip of paper, I can hit NA, so we just see the strip of paper. As it spins around, we get a larger and larger curl of paper and just a lot of control. Now this is controlled just by this move, just by this being moved up and down. So to begin with, I think something that might be nice, let's move this bend deformer perfectly forward until it's directly lined up with our curling paper. So hitting the middle mouse button, finding a side view, scoot this forward until this bend deformer line is exactly on top of our papers line. Excellent. And now, yeah, if we have our world coordinates on, as I move this up and down, you can see only our Y is changing. That's exactly what we want. So how about a couple of keyframes? What I'm thinking is at the time of 0, I would like this to be all the way at the top. This is a place where you would decide if you want this to unfurl or if you want it to curl and disappear. So obviously it could be changed later on, but this is the point where you decide that. In my case, I would like it to curl away. So I could start right at the beginning, but there's going to be some additions we do later on that mean I'll scoot it up a little bit extra, just a little bit above where I currently am. There's only one parameter that needs to be keyframed, and that is the bend coordinate Y position, selecting just Y. Click the keyframe. And then how about just fast forwarding to the end? It'll be 3 seconds long. I want this to move all the way down until it's the last possible place for it to be. So zoom way up and I can bend that right there. If I go any further, it'll peel the entire thing away from the wall. If you want to do that, obviously that works. But right there is the maximum for what I am currently setting up. Click to add another keyframe on Y. And if you were to zoom back out, rewind all the way, hit play, we should see this. It takes a split second for it to begin as it moves in from the top, and then the entire thing will curl and slowly ease its way out because we have ease in and ease out on our keyframes by default. So there we go, a single layer peeling away. If I were to turn the cloner on, then we've got a bunch of them peeling away. I don't like seeing all these linear fields, so I will hide in the viewport the bend deformer, and now we just see this entire poster now peeling away, which is actually working quite nicely. Obviously, we wouldn't have needed to make a bunch of stripes if we just were doing this, but this curling technique, I think by itself is pretty neat, and makes the bend deformer a lot more powerful. With all these components all moving at the exact same time, I think the first thing that might be nice to do would be to offset them in time. So here's my thought. With the cloner selected, how about creating a MoGraph effector, plane effector? This will be plane.time. It's going to be affecting time. Currently, it's affecting the position. Don't want that. I do want to affect the time. This is an animation that is 90 frames long. That is how much I'd like to affect it by. So, time of 90. Not much happens. If I hit play, you see that it's just delaying the entire thing. I think if we were to go beyond this time, we'll see it start curling, but from 0 to 90, nothing happens. This gets really interesting, though, by going into the fall off and adding a step effector. Add in the step, and immediately, and it doesn't look right in the beginning, but as soon as we refresh, I think we're going to see that they curl one after another. This white material is a little bright until we add the proper poster, so I'll just make a blank material that's maybe a little more gray, just so it doesn't blow it out. Okay, back to the step effector. As these curl away, we are now controlling how they appear based on what the step effector is doing. Clicking on the step effector, you can go into remapping, and under there, contour, and here is a curve. This curve, you see, is visually represented in the way that this is getting applied. Over the course of these 90 frames, this should represent the entire arc of everything that we're seeing. So what is super cool about this is all we have to do is reshape this, and that becomes the shape that the poster gets revealed. If I make this dip in the middle, then the poster will get revealed by a big dip in the middle. Our overall animation is supposed to be 90 frames long, and now we've added on an offset of up to 90 frames. So for this animation to complete itself, we will need 180 frames. That'll jump it up, hit rewind, and then play. And from the middle point, those will get erased out. And over time, eventually, everything gets erased by whatever shape we draw in here. I could add in a little extra peak right there. Maybe this part goes up a little extra there. Whatever shape we make, that is how it's going to be revealed overall. So if you're talking just motion graphics, I think this is really clean. There's a lot of application of this. You can imagine this rewinding the opposite direction and we're revealing something. So that could be really neat. And of course, we are erasing something. A lot of possibilities, just essentially stopping here. So keep all of that in mind. But of course, we've got more to cover. So we have complete control over the way this falls off. Let's put that back to a slightly more simplified form. And instead of this being perfectly kind of controlled by this, we could add variation. That's straightforward. Adding a random field on top of this, setting that to something like overlay. And this could be set to a different noise. It could be set to just straight random. And now, in general, we're going to get the shape we drew. It's still dipping in the middle, but that overlaid noise will add extra variation on top of it. And just to show you, if we had taken this and maxed the entire thing out, you'll see that as they all move down, actually, you can't overlay with them. They're all identical now that I think about it. But as I pull this down, instead of them all moving identically, you definitely see some get left behind, some go further ahead because this is set to overlay. That means they all begin when they used to begin, and they all end when they used to end. So that gives a little bit of extra randomness, which I do like. So with our poster peeling away from the center, what would we like to do next? Well, if you are doing a simple version of this, then there's a good chance you're going to want to apply a material here, but there are limitations. First of all, saving this file again, let's bring in a material. Double clicking, making a brand new material. We'll leave this in Vanilla Cinema for now. Opening up my file manager, I can grab this poster, and this poster is Space Race by Tobias from the Rocket Lasso Slack. And I wanted to mention that there are some really cool challenges that happen monthly and weekly on the Rocket Lasso Slack. And if you want to, you can head on over to rocketlasso.com/community and join the Slack channel. And there are weekly challenges, and this is the result of one of the weekly challenges, and you'll see it bigger in a moment. It's a result of one of the weekly challenges where they were making space posters. So pretty cool. Let me show you a problem though. If I were to apply this poster onto the cloner, it is going to repeat a bunch of times. It is set to UV mapping, and every single one of these pieces of paper has its own UV map. So it's not properly applying them all the way across. So I'm going to show you what I think is a really cool workaround, and I've actually used this technique on a bunch of different things. So this is one to keep in mind, file away for the future. What we're going to do is make a baked down version of this mesh that we can then project any of our animation systems onto. To begin with, putting the entire cloner into a connect object, make sure weld is turned off. This is very important because we don't want to change our point counts. Temporarily, we don't need these materials right now. I'll delete them and then make an entire duplicate of our whole setup. This new connect can be made editable. It's got children, but none of these are actually doing anything. So just delete anything that's a child of this one. This one can be poster render. That is what will actually render. And hiding the original one, we just have this new poster. Now, you know that with this big parametric setup, we can't modify the UVs. And even here, a stick texture tag will not work. You cannot pin the material. And if we did a frontal projection, the stripes would just pass right through it. I would like to apply the material to the poster render object. And let's do a projection of flat. So there's now a flat projection on there. If we went to the texture space, then we could move this around. It's super huge. Something that's really cool that was pointed out to me in the chat was if I right click, I can say fit to object, and instantly it's going to snap to the overall geometry of the object. And now a really nice technique that we've been doing for a while is right click and say generate UVW coordinates. We have now converted what used to be a projection flat into a projection UVW. It created this new UVW tag, meaning this old one can be deleted. And this is now going to stick perfectly to this mesh. Having done that though, how do we make this move in the way that this is moving? Well, it's not super straightforward, but it's pretty neat. Right clicking on the poster, we can go to rigging tags and pose morph. Under pose morph, I want to animate the points. So here is the original shape of the poster. So that's the base pose. And then we have pose 0. What is pose 0 supposed to be? Well, I'm going to tell it that I want pose 0 to be linked to this connect object. Dragging that connect object into it, it is now automatically linking to it. Moving into the animate tab, it is set to 100%. So, hey, whatever the poster is doing, this should be doing. But we won't see anything. I don't think we'll see anything right away. If I try and scrub this, you see nothing seems to be happening. And that's because we need to go to the basic tab and increase the priority of expression, the top one, to 1. So it calculates one frame, one refresh after the base priority. And the instant we do, only seeing this poster render, it is now transformed. It's now taken the points from the connect object, which are identical in every way in the beginning state, and it's modifying them however our rig is changed. So now as I scrub, you'll see this poster is curling away. But not only that, most importantly, you'll see that on the interior of this poster, it is actually rolling the material with it, and it's not magically passing through in a way that we don't want. So this is now a setup to see the poster get peeled away, or in reverse, get revealed. A couple other things we should do right away. Something I noticed is there can be a frame of lag happening, especially as we add a bunch of deformers on here. So a way of cleaning that up is changing this base priority from expression to generator, jumping this up to the highest possible number, which is 499, and then lowering the base priority down one. So this is the last thing to calculate, and that just makes sure that there's not going to be a frame of lag and it all syncs up really well. So scrubbing our timeline, anything we do to the original will translate over to this perfect UV'd object. That is a technique I definitely use in other places. Pretty much when UVs aren't cooperating, this is a way to get around it. Go back to object mode, give that a quick save. As I said, depending on what you're doing, that you could be done. This might be exactly what you want. How about taking that material, a second material, and throwing it on here, and I'll say that I want this one to be, I think the front. No, it looks like it's backwards, so I'll just say the back. We'll take this one and say that that one's on the front. And now we actually have a different material on the front of the poster and the back of the poster, so that can be pretty handy. And in addition to that, we can change the, let's go to reflectance. Why not? It's a little shiny right now. So grabbing the reflectance, we can say that that should be wider or dimmer, sharpen that up brighter or less. We'll pull that back significantly, a little wider maybe, just to see the poster. Now let's, like I said, this could be a place where you wrap up and that's all you want it to do. But I'd like to mess this up a bit more, especially if you were thinking of this in the context of like some sort of haunted house and these are supposed to peel away and be a little bit more messed up. It's very clean and perfect and kind of MoGraphy right now. So what are some ways we might add some variation onto this? There's a lot of different varieties of variation we can add onto this. And I'm going to start with the most simple, and then we'll move into the more complicated ones, just because it's a better order of operations. The first thing that I would like to change is right now all of our stripes are identical. They're the same width. So, and because we're not going to be, let's turn off the poster render and let's just go back to the original one while we're working. I would like to add some variation onto these. Unfortunately, I've never figured out a way of randomly scaling things left and right that also will perfectly line up these vertical lines. So if somebody knows a way to do that, I'd love to know. Please put a comment below. But I do know a way to deform it. I'd love to do it with like effectors and fields, but I've never figured that out. But I do know how to do it if we are going to apply it with deformation. So here's the thought. Creating a plane deformer. Actually, it's a plane effector, but I'm going to treat it as a deformer. So I'll say dot deform. I like naming these just so we know what they do. So before the bend calculates, which means putting it first, this is going to calculate first. What do I want it to do? Well, I would like it to deform. So deform points. I don't want it to push on Y, but I would like to push it on X because this is along X. So increasing this to whatever I'm at, you can see it's deforming along X. So, okay, excellent. I don't want it to deform everywhere equally though. So going to fall off, I can create a random field. And now you see we get these wavy lines. That's kind of interesting, but I don't want wavy lines. I want these to be straight lines. So here's the thought. If the space is not set to field, but be global, then, well, first of all, you get these cool wavy lines. Maybe there's some use for this. You see how they're going to curl away and be all crazy wavy. So maybe there's a use. What I'd like to do is super stretch this noise to be super huge, both vertically and on Z. So on Z and Y. So here is X, Y, Z. So I'm thinking if we put in a really large number on Y, I'm just going to type in a bunch and you see it's going to drop down to something smaller. And actually, I don't even have to put it on Z, but I do want to put it on Z. So let's put in a bunch of zeros there as well. You're now going to see that that waviness went away, and you can see that there's a really skinny line here, and then these are fatter. So we've now added random variation in how much this is stretching, because essentially what we did was we made a really tall, flat sheet of noise. So vertically speaking, all of them want to line up. They're all doing the same thing because they're in that same cloud of stretched out noise. But horizontally speaking, it still has a lot of variation. So if I were to grab this global scale and start pulling it down, you'll see that we're going to get all this wiggling left and right. This can be pretty powerful in a lot of different applications. But we want to make sure that we don't push this too far. And there's a lot of, you can get into trouble if we do push this too far. So under parameter, let's start decreasing this X until nothing shoots past itself. Now we could be very mechanically careful. There's two ways of thinking about this. If I could just eyeball this and get it to the perfect number so that I can see like that one right there is getting really skinny. And if that's as skinny as I want it to go, then that's fine. But this is being selected through a big cloud of random noise. And it's entirely possible that if we were to make more copies, let's say we're making more wallpaper, and I can select the cloner and just start increasing this, there's a good chance that as I increase this, I'm going to get some that are passing too far because I just eyeballed it. Mathematically speaking, hitting undo, mathematically speaking, we know that this is 3.04 wide. I could copy that number, go into our plane deformer, and then put that in. And as long, and I'm not sure off the top of my head, I can't think if, actually it is probably half of that number is the actual number we want. And that means that the left side can push in up to that amount and the right side can push up to that amount, which means it will never quite pass over itself. The reason why these all sort of look medium-sized is because this is all being generated through a big cloud of noise. It's stretched out noise, but it's a big cloud of noise. And the big cloud of noise typically isn't hitting the brightest color or the darkest color. It tends to be these middle gray colors. Just picture a basic Perlin noise. It tends to be very gray. So we're not getting the full contrast of that. So now that we put in that proper number, I could add a curve in here, and this curve can give us added contrast in that. So as I pinch this towards the center point, both bringing the bottom towards the middle and taking the top one towards the middle, you see I'm increasing the contrast of that noise. And once again, this is getting really skinny. If I were to pull this all the way to the center point, it's possible that, randomly speaking, one of these could get to be infinitely thin. But increasing the noise by this amount, I think, is pretty good. Keep in mind, we can click on this random noise, keep on clicking on different random seeds, and end up with completely different layouts. I'm not going to address it really, but keep in mind that this is technically going to stretch the poster a little bit left and a little bit right. We could probably do a secondary fall off and avoid the beginning or end, but this was the technique I wanted to mention. And now we have randomly sized stripes. As these each peel down, they each have their own size. So that is working quite nicely for me. Give that a save. The next deformation, the next variation I'd like to add would be just making it so that as these peel away, that they could maybe get a little skinnier, just visually get some variation. And on top of that, we'll be able to mess them up a little bit. So here's the thought. We're going to use the displacer. I don't actually use the displacer that often these days because I'm always reaching for the plane to deform because technically it calculates a little bit quicker. But this displacer is set up perfectly to do something a little bit more advanced for us. After the scaling has happened, so I'm going to move it after that, but before the bend happens, I would like this displacer to do something. What would that be? Well, I would like to do a very similar deformation, like moving things left and right. So changing the direction from vertex normal to planar, I would like it to deform something on the orientation of x plus. How is that going to affect this? Well, I want it to take the left side of any given peel, any given strip of paper, and take the left side and pull it to the right, and then take the right side and pull it to the left. How would we go about doing that? With a shader, specifically a nice straightforward one, just the gradient. And even on default, that's exactly what we want. This is now saying, hey, because we're saying intensity centered, it means if it's black, go left. If it's white, go right, or possibly the opposite, I'm not sure. Now this gradient is applying individually to every single strip of paper, meaning if we go to the height and I start decreasing that, as I pinch this down, let's see if we can get this. Yeah, it's at 0, so nothing's happening. If I pull down, you see every single stripe has gotten skinnier now. So if it's getting skinnier, that's what we want, but I don't want it everywhere all the time. I want it to be limited. So we'll limit it by going to the fall off and limiting it to that same linear field. So drop that in, and now we can see that it's peeling away at the top, but more specifically on these parts that have already peeled down a little bit, you can see that it's getting skinnier as it goes. Remember, we put that slightly larger than we needed linear field. So if I were to rewind this all the way, it's still mapped not quite as far as I need. So we can fix that by remapping this again, adding another curve. Just grab this bottom line and start pulling it up. And as I do, you see I'll erase out the bottom part of that linear curve. Make sure I'm all the way in the bottom. And as I do, it goes boop, right to the top. But now as it peels away, as they get revealed, it actually gets skinnier as the curl begins. So that is giving us a little bit of pinching inward, which is just a nice little bit of variation. We can make this as powerful or as weak as we want to. Right now it's only -1, but these are very tiny stripes because it's real world units. So that could be smaller, 0.25 if I were inclined, and they'll only shrink that tiny little bit. But something I think is kind of nice is it does a little bit of a reveal before these even come down, hitting NA. You can see that there'll be a little bit of a split before it even gets there. I think that's kind of a nice reveal. But this gets even better when we start adding some variation. Putting this height back to 1, so like pretty extreme power there. I would like to not just have these push in uniformly, I want them to be randomly pushed in. So that also goes to the displacer's fall off. And just keep in mind how we separated these. The shading is giving us the direction, like take the left, push to the right, take the right, push to the left, and now we're saying, well, where does that get applied? Well, it gets applied when the linear field says it should. And now I would like it to get applied where, well, I'm going to do it the wrong way and then we'll do it the right way. But just to show you the concept, if I create a random field and say multiply, then now it's a little big. I'll shrink that down to 5. Now you can see that it's added variation to the edges, shrinking them in, but shrinking them in more or less because we're multiplying on what we already did. Now, the random field immediately shows us a good effect, but we are passing through a giant cloud of randomness, and we don't want that. And under space, we can do global, we can do field, we can do none. I'm not even sure what none does. But we actually need this to be two-dimensional. If we're going to be doing two-dimensional noise, it can't be with a random field, so that gets deleted. And instead, adding a shader field. Shader field, that also will multiply. And then inside the shader field, we can feed in a noise. Feeding in the noise, that noise can be set immediately to space texture 2D, and now it's a two-dimensional noise, which means it will be stuck to the paper and it won't be passing through the cloud. Having said that, it's still a very large noise, so dropping this down pretty small, let's say 5, now you can see that the zigzags come back in again. That number can increase. The more we increase it, the more uniformity we'll see. So let's see, as we get to larger numbers, you see how we start feeling the curve? If we're smaller than in this particular scale, about 30, then they start feeling really kind of random, like we don't know how big they are. And it's just kind of like, well, they might be anywhere. But as we increase this, we can start seeing a little bit of uniformity. So choose the scale appropriately. Maybe you want that randomness. Maybe you want a little bit of soft curve. But the point here is, via all these very carefully placed shaders and fall-offs, we are able to control how messed up this looks as it peels away from the wall. We get this nice reveal as these peel, but maybe we don't want that to happen. So we can control that by going back into the displacer, grabbing that curve for our remapping, and let's just start pinching away that linear fall-off. And as I pull this further up, you see that the stripe, it doesn't begin until the bend begins. So we could do that, and we can also pull it down a little bit, which I do like. And as it peels away, we now get those messed up curls, and those curls will be accurate and stuck as it rolls all the way down to the bottom of the scene, and those curls will continue to be accurate. An important note is that this plane deformer that we made and this displacer are somewhat fighting each other. They're doing similar things. So if we do less displacing, if we take the plane deformer and we do a little bit less than we currently are, so currently it's a 1.5, but if I drop that to, let's say, 0.75, then there's a little less randomness in between the individual stripes. And honestly, I don't want to get rid of that much. But if we guarantee that they are a certain width, then that means we can take this displacer and have it do even more. So by making one bigger, I can now go even smaller on this one. That's a little far. So 1.5, and you can see that these get really messed up. We're really able to mess these edges up. So keep in mind the limitation. If you push one really far, you can't push the other one quite as far. Those two are playing in the same ballpark. All right. That is all working very nicely. I'm very pleased. I don't want to see all these effectors appearing, so I will hide the deformer, hide the displacer. We can see the results of those, peeling everything away. And yeah, quite happy with that. Give it a quick save. What I would like to do next is let's add a little depth in here. I would like them to curl away from the wall, like give them a little bit, kind of like one of those slap wrist bracelet things, like give them a little depth, and we can apply that at any time that we want. But in order to do that, we're going to need extra subdivisions on every single strip here. However, we can't add extra subdivisions to this because it's going to mess up the way we are displacing it. So if I were to say, hey, I want 5 subdivisions, every single stripe of subdivision is going to get a different amount of deformation, and that could mess everything up. So we can't do it this way. So let me show you a way of getting around that. I would like to create less of these vertical stripes, as few as we can get away with. So in this case, how about selecting the paper wall, and the height segments, maybe 50. And now you see I've decreased by half the count. That will decrease the resolution that we have of them getting messed up in the edge. So if you want to keep that, keep this number high. Having done that though, we now have a relatively even polygon count. So now that this is the end result, how about subdividing it? So with this paper selected, holding down Alt, I can create a subdivision surface, which will subdivide everything after all those deformations have happened, which means it doesn't make any lines cross over each other. So this should actually be pretty clean. One of the problems, though, is we're going to get these curls on the bottom, and we don't want that. But there are different types of subdivision. There's a good chance you haven't tinkered with this. I know I didn't for years, but if we click on this dropdown, there's different modes here. And if we were to click the Open Subdivide Catmull Clark mode, and then, which looks pretty much identical to what we're used to, but there's a boundary interpolation setting here, and if we set that to edge and corner, it'll actually put the corners back out and be really sharp, which we get the nice smooth curls here, but the corners will still be sharp. So that's the perfect combination. Now we still get our variation here. We'll still get, let me go up to the top and hide our edges, and you'll see that we still get this curl, this peeling away in between happening. But now I want to get those slap wristband looks where it's kind of curled on the edges. So we'll do a similar technique to what we had been doing, and I think we can get away with using a plane deformer. So how about a plane deformer? This is going to go above the subdivision surface, so it actually applies to that result. I would like it to, again, be a point deformer. It's going to super explode. That's because it's pushing out on Y. I don't want that, so 0. And let's push this out on Z. I'll say 5, which is going to be too much. Let's even say -5, so it's not passing through the wall. So that's definitely way too much, but it'll show us the effect. And I don't want this to be applied everywhere. I want it to give us a curl look. And a really straightforward way to do that is inside the fall off, give it another shader field. So now it's saying don't apply anywhere because the shader field is empty, but in the shader field, I would like another gradient. As soon as I give a gradient, you'll see that it is applying as we'd expect a gradient to. And it's not applying it all on the left, and it's applying fully on the right. Instead of using the 2D U gradient, how about using the box gradient? And now the box gradient is saying deform the outside, the left and right, the top and bottom, but not the middle. And now we get this big old bulge coming out from the entire thing. It looks a little bit crazy, but if we calm this down a little, let's grab the plane deformer, which we should rename plane deform. And honestly, it's even, I'll just call it plane deform edges. That is really extreme right now, but dropping this technically up, weaker, weaker, weaker. Now you can see we get this little bit of a curl in our overall object. Hit NB so you can see the polygons, and you can see how each of these different lines of polygons is getting curled out. Making a quick tweak inside of the shader field. How about grabbing the right knot, the white one, and pulling it to the right? And as I do, I'm changing the gradient and changing the way that these are applied and smoothing out that curve. So they are curling out, they're peeling out in the middle. As an alternative, we could grab, well, yeah, you see they're out there. I think that is, yeah, that is what I want. So I'm just gonna pull this in a little bit just to get a little bit of curvature to that. And we could even grab the middle knot, and then you can see as I manipulate this one as well, we can manipulate the curve there. So that is actually working quite nicely. That gives us all this depth, but I don't want, again, I don't want this depth everywhere. And I would like it just to appear on our curl for the most part. So again, going into our deformer, going to the fall off, say, hey, I want to limit this, and I want to limit it to wherever this linear field is, dragging that linear field, and say, hey, the shader field will just multiply on top of that one. So by multiplying on it, it's only going to get applied where the linear field has come into play, which hopefully means as I increase this curl, you can now see that these start curling around themselves as they peel away from the wall. Now, you can see it starts curling early down here, which if that's a look you like, then that should totally work. Instead, above the linear field, there could be a curve. And again, pulling that bottom point up, I can start scooting that effect up so it doesn't get applied right away until the curl has properly begun moving down. Personally, the reason I put that giant linear field in the beginning was so that we could have this start happening pretty early. So a little bit early there, I think, is a pretty nice additional effect. Now, this is applying it in a negative value, but under the effector, this doesn't have to be negative. Increasing that Z, well, it's at 0, so nothing's happening, but I could go to a positive number now, and instead of pushing in, it's pushing out. So completely different look depending on if you push it in or out. And either, I mean, both of them look pretty cool. I'm not even sure which one I want. Let's go a little easier. Let's say 0.5 to get a little bit of a curl on there. And I like the look of that. NA, just so it looks smooth. And that is looking pretty good to me. Now, in the same way that we were saying that that one that traveled, like, they pinched in left and right, we wanted randomness on that. We could do the exact same thing here again. We could make this curl outward. It could apply all the time, but we could also say, hey, it only applies sometimes. And that sometimes could be in the fall off, and we'll do the exact same thing we did with this displacement shader. In fact, if we wanted to save some time, we could steal a copy of that one. So it was this shader field, I believe. Yeah, that has the correct noise. So I want it to be a different noise. So I will make a duplicate, copying this, holding down Control or Command on the Mac. I'll move it above this shader field. And this one, we have to drag it in to get applied. So it's getting applied. What do I want to do? Well, I would like it to multiply on top of everything. And now, depending on how much contrast we put inside of this shader field, oh, and also inside the noise, let's give it a different random seed. We can now see, as I change this random seed, it is pushing outward. But you can see as I change the seed, it's choosing different spots to push outward. If we make smaller numbers, again, if we decrease our global scale, we're going to see them be individualized more. So those will get sharper, and it gets a little more craggly. But larger numbers will be a smoother effect. But once again, this is a 2D noise that we copied over. So with it being a 2D noise, then it should be stuck perfectly to our geometry, meaning as I roll these through, then it should be pinching them and tapering them and letting them all scale down in their own unique way, slowly revealing everything. And you can see that the way they get tapered down, that these are actually pinching in really nicely. That is a great addition. Something I just remembered, super duper important, is if I was to scrub through here, let's see if we can see it all right. Sometimes there's like a little popping effect that will happen. I'm going to have trouble getting it to show up because it's a little bit inconsistent. But you can get this like inversion pop happen even during render time, which could be a problem. Oh, there was one right there. It's hard to see, but we can fix that pretty easily by selecting our shader fields. Let's grab all three of them and just turn on refresh frame. And that's going to make sure that's updating based on the geometry changing underneath it. And then that will stop those pops from happening. I didn't know how to do that for a while, and that fixes it, which is really, really important. All right, zoom out, see the entire poster here. Give this a quick save. And there's one last giant thing that you'd want to do for additional variation. And that is creating a duplicate of this entire setup. If this is a paper peel, the best way to get variation on here is to make more than one. Currently, they're just offset on time a little bit, but they're all identical. And I tried a lot of different ways. There's a couple different limitations I've run into, and there's entirely different ways that this rig could be built. But given the current rig and the way we built it, the best way to get some variation is to just create a copy of the entire rig. So this entire paper peel, null, hold down Control or Command as I make a duplicate of it, and just tweak some numbers about it. In fact, how about fast forwarding towards the end? And we could add variation in this case by, first of all, grabbing our random seeds, going into the noise, and just typing in a different random number. That will give those, that one's a shader field we don't need here, but this one we do. Give that a different number as well. That's going to add in some variation. Inside this deformer, we've also got this random field. That can be given a different number. Actually, that's the global deformation. I don't think we want to change that one. If I change the number, yeah, that's going to create gaps in between. So don't change that one. But if we go into, let's say, the bend, we can say that, hey, every other one, and currently, because this cloner is now being fed two different objects, we can say every other one is going to be different by decreasing or increasing the strength of the bend. Let's do a little bit less. You see that these curls are a little bit bigger. And if we were to make another copy, we could change again the random seeds, but this time say that this bend is a little bit extra, a little bit tighter than the ones around it. And potentially, like pivoting, you could rotate it. I haven't done this, but if we rotate this a little bit extra, then you're going to tighten up that curl or loosen the curl. So that could add in variation as well. This cloner is currently set to iterate mode. Sadly, we cannot change it to blend mode, which could give us infinite variations, but it's just a limitation of Cinema. But we can, right now it's going to do first, second, third, but we could say, hey, let's randomize, and now it's going to randomly assign them, which could be a good way of getting extra variation. Zooming out and scrubbing, we can see that each of those will curl down, doing their own thing. Again, the variation inside the time, very important, by increasing, or I'm sorry, grabbing the fall off tab, we can grab the step effector and remap however we want these to be. Let's say that, you always want something on the bottom. You kind of want the full range of motion, but we could add extra points and pull this down further. So that edge will start pulling down, or maybe this one delays, maybe the entire middle goes, and those edge ones are delaying the most. So I've completely changed the layout there. If you don't like the way that the curling down at any point, you could always grab this random field and change the random seed that it's applying, and you can see the variation we get. In general, the middle is still going down first, but you get a lot of variation in the way that they all go down to meet it. And then currently everything is offset in time, but they're all traveling at the exact same speed. You can see them peel away and start curling down, but they all move the same speed. We could add some speed variation inside the plain time by adding another random field. Say, we can overlay. Here's the simplest way, is saying overlay. Currently it's set a Perlin noise. It's a pretty big noise. I'm dropping that down to say 22. You can see that suddenly that one popped back up a little bit. An interesting thing is if we add some animation speed in here, the cloud of random noise that's overlaying is going to be kind of saying like, go faster. Well, it's essentially saying you're earlier in time. Oh no, you're later in time. So to blatantly show it, let's put the time up to something kind of fast, like 222. So more than 200%. And what we should hopefully see is not something you probably want, but as these curl down, they have the possibility of rewinding a little bit. So let's see if we spot one. Oh, see that one? So it kind of paused and then went up and then sped up down again. And oh, look, see these two are super curling up before then they curl down. They will still start at the same time and they'll end at the same time. They'll all complete. They all will start properly. They'll all end properly because this is currently set to overlay. And you see by the time we get to the end of this timeline, they all have to be done. But this animation speed is enabling them to be a little bit faster or slower at different points. Now, 200 is too fast, but I think something around 75 means you'll get that variation where they can slow down, but they probably won't curl their way back up again. But you just have to experiment and see if you, if you like the look, and you can always make it a little bit stronger. Actually, that one did seem to curl up just a little bit, so maybe a little weaker, but it's just something to eyeball and see how you want that variation to go. Another thing that we can do to add some variation on this is, well, this isn't even actually about variation. It's about additional keyframes. Currently, and maybe I should have done this a step earlier, give that a save, done it a step earlier because I'd have to change all of them at the same time. And like I said, that's kind of like the last step you want to do. So to keep it simple, I will delete 2 of those. We just keyframed one thing. There's only 2 keyframes in this entire animation, and that is just in the bend deformer moving up and down. But you could add additional keyframes and do additional effects. As these are all curling down, it's just the position changing. But what if we said that about part way through the animation, I would like to keyframe the strength, and then near the end of the animation, I'd like to keyframe the strength again. But then at the midpoint of the animation, let's make it be different. We can curl this in, and they're not all refreshing, but they will as soon as I change the time. If we change the strength here, and you can see the curl, unfortunately it's not refreshing the viewport right away for us, but if I were to weaken this and then add a keyframe, oh, that makes sense. It's not going to refresh in the viewport because we need a keyframe for it to exist. So as soon as I add a keyframe, then now the time can apply to it. And if I do a refresh, you'll suddenly see they get really big. So they're not very bent right there at the midpoint. So just to show you, this is going to be kind of exaggerated, but they're going to start peeling down, but then they're going to start unraveling themselves a little bit, and then re-raveling themselves really quickly. So we do have the option of kind of rearranging these however we want. I'll delete all 3 of those middle keyframes. Delete after selecting them. And we could say that this is beginning with like a really subtle curl. So let's say that in the beginning, this very first keyframe, I'm going to say, actually, they're curling, but they're not very curled. So override that. And then at the end, this entire time, I'll be like, oh, it's been tightening and tightening and tightening. So by increasing this bunch, and if we turn off the cloner, we'll see that. We'll instantly see the result of the singular one. So if we zoom in here, you can see that we are going from this big unraveled state to, we can really tighten that up a bunch, depending on the rotation we have as well. So we can tighten that up. And now that those are keyframed, turn your cloner back on again. And we should see these curls tighten as they go down. So we have so much variation on the way that this can all be applied. And that actually is pretty cool. I had never done that before, but the way those are curling, there's something kind of compelling about that. But it could do the opposite. Maybe at the end they should be bigger. In fact, let's say that you were doing some sort of spooky something or something a little bit more motion graphics-y. And at the very end, you don't want to see these curls anymore. So what if we scale them down to nothing? Do a quick save just in case. Selecting the paper peel, I would like to scale them down So under coordinates, X shouldn't change, but maybe Y and Z do. And I don't want them to just disappear, so let's give them a little transition. So starting at 80, I would like the Y and Z scale to be recorded. And then at the time of 90, when they're they're easing out, they're disappearing, I want them to scale down. You can't scale down the 0 here because then the cloner doesn't know how to... It can mess up the matrix and it can suddenly shoot in a different random direction. So I'll just say 0.001 to scale them down real small, copy, paste, and then keyframe both of those. And now that those are keyframed, give it a little refresh. And as we are going down, you'll see actually no effect. Why is it no effect? Well, that's because the cloner is currently overriding everything. The cloner is resetting the coordinates, meaning it says, hey, I'm in control. You don't get to control the scale of this. I control the scale. But by turning this checkbox off, then you see those suddenly disappear. They're disappearing because it is taking the keyframes we took into account, the position, scale, rotation keyframes into account. And now as we get to the end, those will just shrink down to pretty much nothing and disappear. Every single one just disappearing as they reach the end. Of course, those are keyframes that you can manipulate. So selecting the null, I could select these keyframes and we say, okay, that's going to take a little bit longer. We'll give it a bunch of time to slowly fade out so it doesn't pop as much. And you just see those disappearing as they go. But of course, this works the opposite way. If this animation had been keyframed, in reverse, then this would be rewinding and they're going to sort of be appearing out of nowhere and then peeling, unfurling and finally revealing the poster. So there's a lot of possibility to go and combine all of these different things. And this is definitely not the limit of it. These are just some of the variations that I wanted to see in there and the ways I wanted them to curl around. Keep in mind making duplicates and adding different deformations. In fact, there's things you could do like going into the bend, and I'll do this as a duplicate, make a second one. And now every other one, I'm going to say the bend should... Currently the angle is 90, but what if we change the angle? And you're going to see that if we twist that, it's actually going to tilt them off to the side a bit. So those actually taper out. So you could actually have some of these stripes tilt one way and some tilt the other way and some go straight down the middle. So much variation you can add. Keep in mind changing the depth of the wiggle on the left and right, changing the depth of this curl. You could even have some of them invert the curl. That was just straight up our deform edges. So you could make a duplicate, which this is, and say, hey, this one's negative. So now we can see some of the curls are curling inward and some of the curls are curling outward. So much variation you can add in there. And of course, all these unroll perfectly to that original poster shape. So the last thing to do here, because we are done, the last thing to do is to make sure that, you can see that these are already pre-ripped a little bit on the top. Maybe that's something that's fine. Maybe you want that. But we should probably go to the offending deformers, and let's check which one. This one, it looks like it's on two different ones. So I'll temporarily turn this one off so I can go to this one. And it looks like I just need to fix that remapping just a little bit. So, I don't think it's that. It is the displacer. So the displacer is probably doing that. So if I just take this and move it up a little bit more. Gotta be careful not to move it up, but to the right. No, that actually doesn't seem to be doing. Let me turn that off. And what is actually causing this? Oh, there's two different papers. So let me delete one. And now we can see that it is just the deformed edges. I had two different sets and that was showing them differently. So sorry about that. Grabbing just this singular curve. If I just scoot this a little bit to the right, you can see that's going to erase out the little bit we're sneaking in. And that's why I had originally taken this bend and animated it a little bit higher up. So, that could have potentially been further. But in any case, we still only have a couple of keyframes in this entire animation, and we get so much output from it. And you saw the simple version. This was all just things to add variation. So as a final step, just give that a save, and let's reconvert this to the poster. We changed a lot of things about it. So the main thing being we changed our point count because we subdivided it. So unfortunately, with all these extra points that we can't use the old poster because it doesn't have the same point count anymore, and those can only deform if it does that. So we have to do it again from scratch, but why not just do it together here? It's really, really quick. We've already got this connect. So, and that probably should have been named to, poster rig. And now duplicating that, well, we'll name it in a second. Make it editable. Delete everything that's a child. And this is just going to be the poster render. We don't need the UV tag. We know that's wrong. Moving these two materials over, I would like to hide the original rig. And this is here, but honestly, it doesn't do us any good, so that can be deleted. It's so quick to fix again that I'm not worried about it. So selecting this material, I would like it to be a flat projection. It's actually remembering its spacing from before, but because we did change the scale a bit, right-clicking and saying fit to object, and they'll put it perfectly center. Right-click, generate UV coordinates, and now it's based on UV, meaning the texture will properly apply as it curls. And now we just need this to lock on to the poster rig. So right-clicking, rigging tag, pose morph. I would like this to be a generator all the way up at 500. Actually, it's going to be 499 and down 1. This has to be 1 lower than that one. I want to affect the points. It's got a base pose. I want the pose 0 to be targeting the poster rig. And now switching this over to animate mode, it's always 100% whatever the poster is saying it should be. So hopefully scrubbing here, we now get the final poster with different materials on the front and the back peeling away, or if you did the opposite, revealing themselves. And now we've just got a really neat tool and a rig. We can modify this rig in so many ways that can create different animations for us. And keep in mind, only because I changed the point count did we have to update this. If I were to go back into this rig and change the deformations, then that would not require a change. Only a change of point count requires us to update the poster render. In any case, let's just do a quick render of that so we can see it running in real time. Should be very quick. Once again, rewind, save, render settings. We'll just leave it in standard render. Why not? Output, all frames. Everything seems fine there. And actually, I'll just say 540 to be half of an Instagram resolution. Zoom up a bit and send to the picture viewer. What's great is because we set this up, all of the noises on top of everything are set as overlays. We always begin right at the beginning and we always end right at the end instead of it randomly changing the time. So it's 90 doubled because of the offset we're doing. So now, well, I guess I can just hit play. So we get that little bit of lead time and then the pieces all peel away and slowly fade out until we don't have a poster. Or of course we can scrub backwards and get, oh, that looks cool. I do like the rewinding actually more than the forward. This reveal of it, and at the very end, ba-doom, all of the overlay. So hopefully you find lots of different uses for it. The scene files for this are available on Patreon. If that's the preferred workflow you have, reverse engineering, which is like one of my favorite ways of learning things, just getting into the guts of a scene file and then tweaking and tampering with it until I can kind of figure out exactly what's going on. But all of this working really, really nicely. It'd be kind of fun to take this entire rig and copy and paste it so that there's a poster behind that and it peels away and a different one peels away and a different one peels away. There's a lot of possibilities. Or maybe it all curls down and then recurls up and there's something different there. So many different things we could do. We could take displacement from this brick wall and apply it onto the poster so it's matching it a little bit. And keep in mind that this is a poster we happen to do, but you could do a couple of these and have it be wrapping a box. It could roll up to a top and the next part could roll forward. Potentially you could even apply some sort of bend at some point, and this could be bending around a corner. There's a lot of possibilities here, and hopefully between the simple version and then the more complex variations we added on, you see something that will be applicable to your overall workflow. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and seeing that you made it all the way to the end, you seem like the type of person who likes this type of tutorial, this type of deep dive technical content. If you'd like to support me in making more of this, then I do have a Patreon set up where you get early access to these tutorials at least a week early. You get access to the scene files for reverse engineering. There's also bonus live streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays where I try and do more technical things and even experiment in putting these tutorials together. So if you'd like to support, that's a great way to do it. But otherwise, I think it's just a really fun technique. There's a lot of possibilities on this kind of one. It's actually, for kind of a basic output, there's so much artistic variation that can be made. So I'm looking forward to this one going out, and the next tutorial I think is gonna be really fun as well. But in any case, that's gonna wrap this one up. I'll see you in either the next tutorial or the next Wednesday live stream. So until then, bye-bye everybody.